everybody. We are Hypercube, and we're excited to be doing this presentation as part of the New York Women Composers presentation called Tutti. It's okay. We're working with some technology here, so bear with us, but I think we have it all figured out. So first of all, we are a mixed quartet of piano, saxophone, percussion, and guitar, and we sometimes double on other instruments. For example, I double on accordion and sometimes keyboards. Aaron plays 4 saxophones and sometimes even 5. Chris plays a wide array of percussion instruments, and has been asked to do many different things. And Jay plays acoustic and electric guitar and has played banjo, right, as part of Hypercube. So we're lucky to have the opportunity to be able to offer this wide range of colors to composers when we collaborate with them. So our mission as an ensemble is to commission and perform brand new pieces for our instrumentation, to build on the repertoire and to keep new music going strong. So today we're going to talk particularly about 4 different pieces that we think work really well for our particular group. And we're going to play a slideshow of a real video of a couple of other pieces that we think sound really awesome and that might bring up some questions in your mind. And we love questions, so please jump in and ask questions if you have them. And we're each going to talk a bit about why these pieces work well for us and why we like to play them. So, first of all, we will play the real video. This is a few different pieces that we've done in the past few years, all of which have been composed for us. So, enjoy. Thank you very much. And by the way, that last piece that you heard was by our very own Erin Rogers, who's a wonderful composer. And we're so lucky to have her write a piece for us. And it's on our album that is called Brain on Fire. Another piece that was on our album from that set is Sam Pluta's American Tokyo Daydream 4. That's the one that you heard with accordion and a lot of sudden back and forth between blocks of sound. And other pieces on that reel were from something we do called the Hypercube Composition Lab, and this is something we run every fall, where we invite composers to come and take part in this lab that we run, where we do workshops, and it ends up in us recording a piece of theirs and playing it in both a live concert, sometimes a live concert, but a streamed concert, and also providing them with those recordings afterward that they can use for various things. So we're lucky to have gotten many pieces that we use over and over from this composition lab that we've run 5 times now, and we're planning to do again next fall. So we're going to move on to considerations that we think about and we'd like for composers to think about when they are writing pieces for us. So one issue is the amount of attack and sustain that each of our instruments have. So since we're a mixed ensemble, Chris and I both play percussion instruments, and the guitar can be considered a percussion instrument too. So it's very much based on attack. But there's also sustain, and Aaron is our sustaining instrument as a saxophonist. We have options for sustain. Jay uses certain pedals that allow for sustain, including reverb and what are those pedals? There's one to capture delay.
That's called Super Ego. It's a freeze pedal.
Freeze pedal is the one I'm thinking about.
Ebo.
And EBO as well. Yeah, so there are many options for sustain in terms of extended techniques. And then it comes to blend and balance. So we love to play pieces that focus on color blend between our instruments and how we can create sounds that blend with one another and also contrast with one another. So we love it when composers consider that because it makes it exciting to rehearse and perform. And we have notation. So notation is what we see as an ensemble when we read the score. So Aaron and I both read from the complete score. It allows us to see what's going on at all times. And since we have, we use our iPads and we turn the pages with our foot pedal, our Bluetooth pedals, it makes it easy to have a lot of pages out there. And you know, it helps us get pieces together in a quicker time. Because often we have we do projects in which we don't have a lot of time between when the composers submit their pieces to when we either record or do a performance. So it allows us to get these pieces put together really quickly. So we read from score, and Jay and Chris both read from parts, mostly because of logistical reasons of many instruments in Chris's case, and having enough things to do with his feet in Jay's case. As you can see, he has a big pedal board over here with many different things to do footwork with. So in terms of notation, we like to see saxophone, guitar, percussion, and piano in that order. We're sort of used to that order. I know other ensembles might use a different format, but that's what we like to see in terms of score. And we like to see everything laid out nice and clearly as possible when we get a piece, because when we eventually put things together, we want to be able to make the process as quick as possible, so we can get to the part of the process where we understand the music and we understand what the composer wants. So I think that's about it for our considerations. So let's move. If you have more questions about that, we can come back to that. But let's go on to one of our pieces, and this piece is Hout by Louis Andriessen. I'm going to pass it over to Chris to talk about this once the example's finished.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. So this is the piece that kind of got Hypercube started as a group. It was Jay and Andrea and myself. We were all grad students together at Sternberg University. And long story short, we ended up playing this piece. I think it's maybe, I'm not sure if it's the first or it's maybe the first major piece that's written for this instrumentation. But for Hypercube, it's kind of the piece that got us all together as a quartet. As students, as I mentioned, we were playing it as grad students, and then we wanted to play it outside of school, and at some point we needed a saxophone, and then that's how Aaron Rodgers got connected with us. And we started performing it frequently, and then we were going on these like small little tours throughout the East Coast and the Midwest area. And this was kind of like our showcase piece along with another piece. But I think it's an interesting piece because it sort of establishes kind of like Hypercube's tone of what we do now. A lot of our music is like very rhythmic. It has sort of very like forward motion type of music that's maybe on the aggressive side. Not always, but we have, I think one of our quotes is like, we're jarring or something like that. You know? Not that this piece is jarring, but it's got that sort of rhythmic intensity to it. The concept behind it is that we're all playing the same melodic pattern. It's just shifted by 1/16 note. So the saxophone starts on the downbeat. The percussion, who's playing marimba, that part is starts on the E of the beat. Guitar is on the and of the beat, and then the piano enters on the last partial, which is the of the beat. And it's pretty much like that throughout the entire piece. And there's really no spot that really repeats specifically. Where we ended this particular little audio excerpt is the only spot where there's a little bit of repetition. But after that, it's pretty much non-stop, just reading all the way from the beginning to the very, very end of the piece. And so that's another thing I think too that sort of is like unique to Hypercube, and it may be somewhat influenced by this piece. Is like a lot of the music that we play, there's not a lot of repetition all the time, but there's usually like a lot happening from beginning to the end of the piece. We don't really necessarily play music that's very often, not that we don't like to, that has a lot of sort of repetition built into it. Sometimes we do, but often a lot of the music we play, there's a lot of like textural and gestural variation going on from the very beginning to the very end. So like I said earlier, this piece really sort of established us as a group, and it's one of the very first pieces from like a established composition catalog or composer that started writing for this group. And obviously like the electric guitar and the combination of the piano and the saxophone and percussion, we're all like fairly loud instruments. You know, it's not like maybe not that the violin or the cello, for example, can't be loud. There's just a certain amount of projection that you can get from this ensemble, and I think that's probably like heard in a piece like this. One little side note about it is that I think does how mean wood, is that right? Or like the grain in wood. So it has like the marimba in it, which has wooden bars. I guess maybe because the piano has like a wooden structure to it, and then maybe the guitar also, like the wooden body, most of the time. Because you can play it on classical guitar too, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be electric. I guess electric is preferred. Yeah, but and then maybe the wooden reed. But one thing that's kind of quirky about the piece, it ends with these like little wood blocks at the very end, or tempo blocks, anything that's like a high pitched wood percussion instrument. And so you're playing all these notes, and all of a sudden you get to the end, it's like bloop, bloop. No, it's kind of quirky in that regard. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. We haven't played it in a while. When was the last time we played this piece? It's been a little while. Yeah, we
This is our recording.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, so we haven't really been performing it much often, mostly because we've been working on our own repertoire, and also it's just hard to get like a marimba in New York City into like a practice studio. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but as you see here, we have like the vibraphone, and this is kind of like the main mallet instrument for Hypercube. Not that we don't use marimba, it's just a little bit more difficult from a logistical standpoint. Yeah, it's one of our favorites. It's one of the first pieces that we started performing often, and it's really the piece that got this instrumentation, I think, like brought to the forefront to people's attention. So we've gotten a lot of mileage out of it. Hope you like that little recording. Anything else? Any questions? You guys want to move on to the next thing? Cool.
So the next piece we're going to talk about and play for you, all of these examples are our recordings, so what you're hearing is us, actually. This piece is called In This Empty Echo by Farzia Fallah, who's a member of the Iranian Women Composers Association, IFCA, and Farzia wrote this for us in 2019 when we collaborated with them, with the whole group, and we were really drawn to this piece for a number of reasons, and I think the title is very fitting. We'll play a little excerpt and then I'll talk about the piece a little bit. So just a short excerpt. Thank you. Yeah, so as you can see, or maybe, I don't know how blurry it is there on the screen, but from the score follower, you can see it's for soprano saxophone, electric guitar, and actually in this recording, I believe Jay's playing a combination of electric guitar and acoustic, or is it just the electric version.
Except just
Just the electric here. Andrea, piano, a lot inside the piano, and then Chris on kind of a multi-percussion setup featuring a lot of, drum, but also bowed medals. And so, if Hout is the piece that we sort of think of as attack, where the attack is the driving force, and we just attack many times in order to create this sort of horizontal line, then this piece is the polar opposite, where we're actually using sort of these trigger points that begin lines, and the sustain, the build of the line is accompanied by moments of decay in the other instruments. So even right from the get-go, you can see on this first page, the saxophone with this sustained line, and the decay in the other instruments being part of that sustained line and supporting it along the way. So Andrea, with a bunch of chords and then the pedal on, that decay from the pedal playing a major role in sort of keeping the sound blend between the sax line, which is actually growing out of it. The whole piece kind of has these punctuating points of either the end of a phrase or the beginning of a phrase, sort of meeting points, I guess, where we all, we have a bunch of different attacks. Sometimes they're exactly vertically aligned, other times they're intentionally sort of flam and sort of contrapuntal, but the piece itself kind of grows from these meeting points where we all converge in a variety of different colors, and then one line maybe grows out of it, and other lines sort of fade off depending on the natural decay of their instrument. So it's one. It's a piece when we practice it. We sort of practice it with two mindsets. One's lining up the rhythmic moments that are, those meeting points, and the other is sort of trying to find the right ratio of blend between the instruments, the right dynamics to be playing in order to have these lines intermingle. You'll notice Jay's on ebow on the guitar a lot, and that ebow, that sustain, sometimes accompanies the sax line right at pitch, and that pitch is wavering on purpose sometimes. So it's about finding that point in which Jay and I are getting the most beating from that line, the detuning of that line. Other times it's, you feel like you want to be in exact unison, or you want to feel like you're sort of a supportive color while another instrument takes over. So there's a lot to this piece in this way, and we've had a lot of fun over the last 6 years of playing it, trying to figure it out. It's a very difficult piece to play. Andrea's inside the pianos for such a large part of the piece that, by finding these all these different points in the harmonics of the piano strings, takes her away from the music, seeing the music, takes her away from sort of sight lines and feeling inner pulse. So we have a lot of cue points in which we need to reconnect and sort of decide who's actually showing time here, so we all know where we are. And that's, you can't see from this, but normally we perform in sort of a cube setup with the piano right in the middle, lid off, Chris on one side with usually the vibraphone or a multi-percussion setup, Jay on the other side of the piano facing Chris, so all three facing each other, and then me with sax sort of in the hip or the curve area of the piano here, so that I can see everybody too. We're all looking all directly at each other, or at least with a strong periphery, and that gives us the ability to sort of cue for a piece like this, where we want to keep time but not necessarily show every single beat. We want to be able to depart from that beating of time, but also sometimes we're involved in a technique that's sort of taking so much concentration that we can't shift and conduct, or we can't change too much our own musical position. So this probably rings true for a lot of you who are musicians or performers, right? This sort of the sight lines thing, the points in which you need to be head down, the points in which you need to be head up in chamber music. But the piece itself moves along in much the same way for the opening, and then you could tell at the very end of that phrase of the excerpt where it sort of falls away, and with the recording through another recording, it's hard to tell, but in a live space, the guitar decay of that line gives a certain space, a certain natural cadence to the line, which is a really beautiful, sort of organic, written in part of this piece. The natural decay of the instruments serves as the perfectly timed cadence, or the perfectly timed end of phrase, because you have you have an organic way in which this sound dies away, and it feels right. It kind of, it's the durational limit of the piece. It's creating the phrases of the piece within it. So that's one thing we really like about the piece. There's also, I mean, there's a lot to it, and we're currently in the process of recording it. But if you are able to sort of get if you want, we can share the score with you. It's a really interesting score to look at, and the front matter talks all about the harmonics in the piano that need to be found, a lot of the preparations for each instrument, and a lot of the extended techniques that you can hear in there. Any questions about Farzia Follow in this empty echo? Well, here's a little bit of the front matter. You probably can't see that from there. The next piece we're going to talk about is Color Fields by Michael Keane. So I'll hand it back to Andrea.
So this is another piece that was composed early on in the process of our ensemble becoming a group of chamber music instruments. It was composed in 2006 for Flexible Music, which used to be a group out of New York that our friend Dan Lapel, who recently subbed with us when Jay was doing an electric guitar concerto, he was part of that group. So he was used to already playing with this ensemble when he joined us for a project. So from 2006, that's a few years before we started. We actually started in 2014, so it's 10 years this year for us. So we really love this piece, and this is one of the pieces that already existed in the canon that we chose to play, and we played a lot early on. So we'll play a little excerpt of this, and then we'll talk a bit about it. So as you can see, it's a very intricate and exposed piece of music. We really it was challenging for us early on when we were getting to know each other's playing to put that together, because as you could see even from that excerpt, the tempo changes were sort of frequent, and when the tempo would change, we would have to be in rhythmic unison and exactly together in the new tempos. So whether they were just slightly faster or slightly slower, and I don't think they were metric modulations in this piece. I think they were just piumoso, and we would see the exact tempo markings, and we knew that he was these tempo markings were exactly what he wanted. And we worked with him a little bit. Actually, he was Aaron's composition professor in Bowling Green State University, where we visited a couple of times. So things about this piece, I mentioned color blending before, and as you could tell from the recording, there's a lot of different color combinations, how the different instruments blend with one another, and each instrument takes a line at a certain time in the music, and you blend with another different instrument. Sometimes there are these trills going on or tremolos that happen, and you can't really tell which instrument they're coming from. And I think Michael does a good job of making that happen and making it just be a blanket, a beautiful blanket of sound with whatever combination he chooses at the time. And he keeps it interesting by changing it up. One other thing I wanted to talk about with this piece is the way that Michael scores the parts. And what I mean by that is he made 4 different parts for each player to follow if they're not following the score that you could see. And in each part were a system of cues. So you would see your own line, and then you would see up above one of the other player's lines, and it would change. But it was the line that you needed to hear at that particular point in time, which I think worked really well for us because we could see and hear the part that stood out within the ensemble, and we didn't need to be reading from the score to know that. This is also a piece that really we realized benefited from us being in our Hypercube setup, which is the close setup that Aaron was talking about earlier. In our earlier touring days, we hadn't discovered the cube setup. And we were going around to different halls and different spaces performing like this in an arc, which looks really nice to the audience, but depending on the space you're in and the amount of sound check time you have, doesn't always work. And we find we need a lot of sound check time because our pieces are just really intricate, and we really need to make sure we hear each other well in order for a piece like this to really work and be effective to the audience. So being in the cube setup and being really close together allowed us to feel like one instrument, feel like we were producing these lines as one, and we weren't spread out and struggling to see one another and play with one another. I think that's about it for that piece, but it's a piece we really love. Yeah, is there a question?
With the tempo changes, did you find that one of you took the lead or conducted and just throughout that, or was it one person, or did you share that responsibility?
Yeah, so the question for those listening online is, for the tempo changes, did one person take charge of the tempo change of showing the new tempo, or was it a combination? And the answer is it depended on what was happening in the music at the time. I think often Erin cues because she has an instrument that we all can see, and she moves really beautifully with the instrument, and she's easy to follow, and she has a great sense of time. And I end up showing time a lot from the piano as well, because everybody can see me, and I tend to just move a lot when I'm playing, like bob my head. They call me a Pez dispenser sometimes when I do these cues. So it completely depends on the music. It depends on the shift in tempo and who has the main line at that time and what the challenges may be, because there's sometimes a challenge in changing a pedal, or although that was for classical guitar, so there's no pedals in that piece. But sometimes Chris has mallet changes, so Chris takes charge if he has some extra things to do, and we want to wait for him to be completely ready. So it totally depends on the music. Yep. So we all share the responsibilities, and we played a couple of times with a conductor early on, but have come to decide that it works better if we do the jobs ourselves, and we find we can listen better to each other if we just share those tasks of showing the tempos and leading all of the cue points. Any other questions right now? Okay, I'll pass the mic to Jay for this next one.
So the next piece is They Solidify Then Tilt by Nicholas Deo. Just a couple of things before we listen to it. The first one is this maybe not the only time that a guitarist composer has written for Hypercube, but it was certainly, I think, probably the first time. And so Nick is a friend of ours and excellent guitarist himself. And often non-guitarist composers that are writing for our ensemble, the instrument that is the most mysterious and riddled with little pitfalls and idiosyncrasies is definitely the guitar. So to have somebody who knows the instrument intimately like that, to write an electric guitar piece with nuance was really nice, and he wrote a fantastic piece. It's also on our album, Brain on Fire. And then the other thing to note, and you'll see it, is this piece includes Andrea on accordion, which is a really interesting instrumentation that blends really nicely with saxophone. So reed instruments that cover like interesting overlap of territory. So maybe we should listen to it. Thank you. So just a couple of things to point out about what you just heard. Obviously, one of the things that Nick is really playing around with here is microtones. You'll notice, in particular in the guitar part and in the saxophone part, but also with the accordion, which can do some pitch bending. You see a lot of quarter tone notations and sort of gradual. If you sort of look at the little line above the guitar line, you see these arrows, and you're constantly moving between quarter tones. And so what Nick is really taking advantage of the whammy bar, this metal arm that controls the bridge on the electric guitar, so you can fine tune and dip and raise slightly all of the strings at once. One of the interesting things about the whammy bar and just the physics of how strings work is if you push down on the whammy bar, everything will go down, but depending on the string, it'll go down a different amount. So you end up getting like these really complex array of microtones. You start off with one chord, and then it kind of becomes a different, a subtly different microtonal spectrum when you alter it. And that blends really nicely with everything else that's going on. It's a piece that really, you sort of don't know what's doing what. Chris is doing a lot with his percussion setup is one of the smallest that we've ever performed with. I think it's just a snare drum and a cymbal, right?
Yeah, it was actually super involved for those two.
It's a snare drum and a cymbal, and he's doing and he's using the super ball on it, so getting all these sort of whale sounds out of it and droning pitches. It's a really delicate and nuanced sort of subtle piece. Another thing that Nick is doing quite a lot here is, and this is a very guitarist thing to do, but he's really taking advantage of the open strings of the guitar. So you have your four fingers of the left hand that are playing the frets of the guitar, and if you want to get these, so one thing that a guitar does not do well is a cluster chord. It's a super easy thing to do on a piano. You just sort of mash a bunch of notes. But on guitar, because of the way that the strings are tuned, it's really hard to get a cluster. And because you only have four fingers, you're kind of limited to how you can reach around the instrument. So if you use an open string and then play on another string, a semitone away, and then sort of do that across multiple open strings, you can get these sort of cluster chords. And if you sort of look through, and he's using these 6-note chords throughout the piece, and they're all sort of variations on that idea. And it's something that as a guitarist you can tell it was written by a guitarist in a way, because it's like, oh, that works perfectly. And it's a really good way to get, whenever you see like just a stack of thirds or seconds in a score, you're like, well, okay, I don't know, this composer's obviously never held a guitar, because there's no way to reach two semitones at the same time. I had one other thing that I was going to say, but it's escaped me. Unless if you have any questions about it.
So what we have here on the screen, you'll see a list of resources that we have. We have each made videos about writing for our particular instruments. And they don't cover everything because it's impossible to cover everything, but they cover a lot of important points that we find helpful for composers. So Jay has one that's over an hour long on writing for electric guitar that's specific to his pedals. Maybe if you worked with another guitarist, it might be a little different, but a lot of them are standard, right? A lot of the pedals that you use.
Actually, that video doesn't go too deep into the pedals.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's mostly about guitar.
Yeah, there's certain major groups of effects.
Yeah. So, and Chris, I know, talks about bowing certain instruments, because bowing is something that's asked of him often. And Aaron has writing for saxophone, and I have writing for piano and writing for accordion. And then we have a Hypercube composition guide that is a general idea of what works for our ensemble, and some charts on there. Like, for example, I have my accordion chart of how the left-hand side of the buttons is organized, and I know Jay talks about all of his pedals on that. So at this point in the talk, well, we wanted to see if there were questions, and I should check the time. We wanted to just talk a little bit about the possibilities of each of our instruments, and I guess we first wanted to ask you if there's anything you would like to hear from the instruments that we have here today, like any particular extended techniques or just any sounds that you think you might like to just hear what they sound like live. So if there's anything, yeah, Anne.
I just have a question. You said you usually play together, sitting next to each other. Is there any way or any possibility where you actually spread out and the sound is more spatial as opposed to coming from a cube?
Anne is asking about possibilities of where pieces involve spatial sound, and I think that's something we haven't done as much as a group because we have the piano and the percussion that are very tied to one place, and often our pieces are on programs that have that are pretty varied, so we have to find a place that works for each of the pieces. But that's an interesting idea of doing things spatially. Yeah, I don't think, I'm trying to rack my brain over the past 10 years that there's something that we've done spatially, but I don't think so.
For an accordion, we usually horseshoe or
Yeah.
boat, and then Charles piece.
Right. Yeah, so with accordion, we usually are in a horseshoe or in what we call battle stations. I don't, that's definitely not a technical term, but it's when we have two on one side and two on the other side and we look great at each other.
You can maybe show them the video of Charles' piece. I mean, that has a little bit of moving around. It's not, you're thinking spatial, like people in opposite corners of the room,
Yeah.
kind of like Sonata style, or, yeah, we haven't really done anything quite like that.
So, but the piece Chris is mentioning is a piece by Charles Rudig. That is it was a new piece for us that we actually performed here at Scholes Street Studio last fall, and it was a piece from our last composition lab that we really love, and we played probably 10 times since. But it involves an old Casio keyboard. It's called SK1. That's the model of it. It's from like the early 90s or maybe even late 80s, and it has a lo-fi sampler option in it. So I operate the keyboard and I sample the different sounds from the various instruments. So Charles wrote it so that Erin and I would start on stage, and Erin plays a multiphonic on the baritone saxophone, and she plays that into the sampler, and then I play the sound back at different pitch levels. So you hear the sound sped up or slowed down depending on which key I play on the sampler keyboard. And then Chris and Jay start off stage and come on when it's their time to begin, and then they play into the sampler, and at the end everyone plays into the sampler, and then I play a soliloquy to end. That's really atonal and really beautiful. Yeah, so that's one piece, and we can send it to you in an email. That might be the easiest way to share it.
We've done pieces where we move around within our like zone, but we haven't really done anything where we individually each left our zone, like separated for any significant distance or anything. So that would be fun to do.
That would be fun. Yeah, something to think about for the future. Yeah.
Get like a marching glockenspiel.
Yeah. It would have to be. Yeah, it would have to be pretty.
We could figure it out.
Yeah, we could figure it out. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, because I can move with the accordion. Yeah, Jay can move with the acoustic guitar. Yeah, could work.
There's also a lot of handheld percussion, that just very simply, like, hold with your hands and walk around. That isn't complicated.
Yeah. So yes, at this point we'll talk about the different instruments and just demonstrate some sounds. Who would like to go first?
Maybe we can turn the projector on.
Yeah.
So these resources, are they available through your YouTube channel?
They're not public, so we'll send them to you
Okay.
directly. Yeah, we don't really want to make them public because we just use them for workshops like this. Yeah, so they're special. But yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I won't talk for too long because I'm sure all of you have some experience writing for piano, or at least know how to write a little bit for piano. So just a few things to consider. If you're writing for keys alone, consider the number of hand positions it takes to play a certain passage. The fewer hand positions I need to move to and from, the easier it is to facilitate a passage. And even some very complicated stuff can work really. What I'm thinking is some very complicated sounding stuff can work really well if it's written effectively for hand positions. I always lead composers to Debussy's music, because Debussy was a pianist, and I know this is really old music right now, but the way that he writes virtuosic sounding music, it just works really well on the piano, and it's very nice. It fits very nicely under the hands. One thing I really like to do on the piano is to play clusters. So you can have clusters with your arm, with your hands. You can have black key and white key clusters, and they get a different sound. The black key clusters will obviously give you a pentatonic type of sound. I also like to play on the strings sometimes, and when composers are writing for playing inside the piano for extended techniques, we always make sure composers know like which or limitations for the pianos that they're writing for. Often it's not okay to use implements inside the piano like bells and John Cage style, you know. So sometimes at particular universities or venues there's a piano designated for that type of thing. But usually I'm allowed to use my hands inside the piano to create different sounds, which actually allows for a wide range of possibilities. So we have we press on the pedal, and you heard this in one of the pieces, the piece by Dennis Sullivan in our Reel video. Along with a hit on the bass drum, I put a big hit on the low strings, the low bass strings of the piano. So that's one of my favorites too. It's just a big resonant sound. Other things you can do on the piano is you can pluck the strings with the nail or with the fingertip. So the nail was the first one, gives it a brighter kind of sound, and then the fingertip is a softer type of sound. The barring on the piano is different when you go from model to model, so I always get composers to consider that there might have to be changes made in octaves that these techniques are going to be played in. Sometimes you can reach a string in one octave on one piano and you can't reach it on another. So plucking the strings is one, strumming the strings is another. And a technique that composer George Crumb uses that I really enjoy is silent keys and then holding them with the sostenuto pedal and then strumming them inside the piano after that. So the sostenuto pedal can come in handy. Yeah, it offers a pretty wide range of possibilities there too with the sostenuto pedal. But that is only an option on baby grand and so that's a thing to think about. So in terms of plucking and strumming the strings, that can happen with your fingers. You could also use a guitar pick. I've been asked to use a guitar pick fairly often, and sometimes a credit card. So I strum the strings. You can strum in different parts of the piano as well. If you strum between the pins and where the dampers are, you might not be able to hear this that well. Let me play it with, I'll play it with. You get kind of an unpitched but twinkly percussive sound there. I've been also asked to play on these pins. So it's a tiny sound like that. Excuse me. You can also dampen the strings, so I'll do a couple of those sounds. I have fall allergies. I mean spring allergies, whatever season it is. Dampening the string can sound really cool. And you can damper to different strengths. So if you just lightly depress the string, you get a lot of pitch, but just a little bit of pitch. But if you really press hard, you get mostly percussion. As in Farzia Fala's piece that you heard, I play a lot of harmonic low strings, and the low strings have I should be speaking into the low strings have the biggest capacity for harmonics because they're the longest. So I'll just play a few harmonics on the low strings so you can hear how it sounds. So sometimes you play 3 keys and play the harmonic, say the first partial or the fifth partial on a few strings in a row. So one lucky thing is that find the line that you have to touch on the string in order for the harmonic to sound. It's sort of a straight line, so you can like angle your hand and get all of those harmonics. Pretty intricate though. It has to be practiced when you go from instrument to instrument. So that didn't work. That's better. That's nicer. So I just angled my hand sort of like this, and played the keys at the same time. And what you do for harmonics is you immediately lift your hand that's touching the strings from the string after the note is played, so that the harmonic can then ring, and so it's not a dampened sound. Is there anything that you would like to hear from the piano that I haven't played? Sarah.
I have a question. Have you guys ever done like amplified sound inside the piano? Like if you were like strumming the pins, right? Or if you had to play the pins and it could be amplified, does that? I mean, that's going to change the quality of the sound when it's heard.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sarah asked if we play amplification, and we do. Some pieces that have been written for us are amplified piano. I'm thinking about a big piece that was written by Eric Wubbles, and it was written for all amplified instruments, right, in quadraphonic sound. So that was a factor for sure. Yes, it would make a big difference if these sounds were amplified, but it also makes a big difference if they're played with even a credit card, like something hard plastic. You can hear it much better. So I don't think I've had to play with amplification to amplify particular sounds, but to get a better balance and to get a certain kind of sound, we've been asked to play with amplification. But yeah, that's a great idea for these very delicate sounds. To have amplification really makes a difference. Oh, I forgot, I have a super ball here, super ball mallet that Aaron brought to me, and and this is usually used on percussion instruments, but sometimes composers ask me to use it on the piano. So one thing that really works is moving this along one of the bars on the piano. So if I press, oh, that's kind of good, but let me try this. And amplified it would be very cool too. So another opportunity for sustain on the piano with this super ball. I'm sometimes asked to play with other mallets as well. A piece by one of the New York women composers, actually, Sangye Kim, who's a friend of all of ours. She wrote a piece for us that's really amazing. Involves mallets, involves like bigger bass drum mallets on the low strings of the piano to create this blanket, like a wash of sound, while there are other things happening in the ensemble. It's really amazing and beautiful. So if there are any questions, let me know, and feel free to reach out at any time after this as well if something occurs to you. So I'll pass it on for now, and we'll go from there. Who wants to go next? You want to go next? Sure. Okay.
I'll just go around the horn. So I brought a tenor saxophone today. I play all the 4 saxophones with Hypercube, soprano all the way down to bari. Probably the most common instrument is tenor with this group. We noticed Hout, which was one of the first pieces for this instrumentation, including the electric guitar meaning, uses tenor, which in classical saxophone normally we play alto. In fact, a lot of us learned alto kind of growing up and as our main instrument. So tenor is a little bit of a departure from that. It's really well in sort of the larger tester of the entire ensemble. So I'll just grab the tenor here and talk about a couple things that work really well with the ensemble. I know probably you've all written for sax, or maybe even played sax, or definitely heard a sax. So there's not, we don't need to start from the beginning, but I'll talk about a couple things that, like I said, kind of fit well with the group. Works. So that's, sustaining a note for a long period of time, no big deal. The saxophone has a very, very strong dynamic range, right? We can play very, very soft and very, very loud. And so in a chamber ensemble, that works really well. If I need to be sort of blending at different dynamic levels, right? It can sit underneath as a pedal tone with the rest of the ensemble, and at times kind of do like these dynamic envelopes or phasing to come in and out. The long tone can be decorated in various ways. So a couple of those, there was a flutter where you heard that was the first thing. I did a little timbre trill for the second. What did I do? I can't remember, vibrato, varying the sort of wave pattern using my mouth. And then what was the last thing I did? Can you remember? Can't remember. Anyway, those are a few ways of sort of like creating gradient or to change the line, thickening the line, and again with the blending of that within the rest of the ensemble, you can take a line and gradually change it with all those techniques, or you can sort of stay stable and then suddenly change in a quick transition. The range of the saxophone, of course, varies from all four horns, but the soprano and tenor are B-flat instruments, the alto and bari are E-flat instruments. This tenor goes down to a low A-flat 2 concert pitch, and that's the lowest sort of sounding pitch I can make. And one of the nice things to do on that pitch is to sort of hold a low pedal tone. So I'll just do that for a second. So that's the lowest note on the horn. I'm doing a technique called subtone, which is where I put my tongue directly on the reed, and that mutes all of the overtones, so you're just getting that low, kind of almost a fuzzy sounding, sort of low, but you can hear the pitch clearly. And what I can do by putting the tongue on the reed is actually circular breathe it. It allows me to do quick circular, which means I'm taking air in through my nose as I'm pushing out with the mouth, which means I don't actually have to stop the pitch at any point. So that can be a sustained note, sort of like a string instrument, right? I can sort of just hold that for a long period of time at a soft dynamic. Note the subtone makes it a very soft dynamic by definition, so there's a sort of threshold to which I can't go over if I'm playing subtone dynamically. But that's a nice little tool to use underneath. And again, when you've got four other instruments that are mostly attack decay instruments, I can kind of hold some of this pitch material if you're working in a harmonic paradigm. So besides that, some attacks. I'll play a couple different sort of attacks and sort of triggers. Things there. Let's see if I can remember them this time. But I started with a slap tongue, which is either a pitched or an unpitched slap, and by unpitched we mean sort of a relatively pitched attack. That's very percussive and has a different quality than a regular tongue note. Versus, so I'm tonguing a note with the second one, but I'm slapping with the first one, and basically popping the reed off my suction of my tongue to create more of a pop. And that can blend really well with something like a wood block. It almost sounds like a wood block, right? Like Chris was alluding to earlier, where the wood sound of the reed sounds a lot like sort of the wood sound of a wood block or the wood sound of a marimba bar. But yeah, that can be a really great trigger point. So right as Chris hits sort of a high tom, or I can slap, and it can be all part of the same sort of meeting point, same attack with the ensemble, and then from there, we're off to the races. But slaps can happen across the entire range of the horn. They're pretty effective in the low range. They're just bigger, and we get to the unpitched slap, which is what they call an open mouth slap, where I'm pitching, I'm slapping, but I'm opening my mouth, and the pitch is lost because I'm no longer sort of focusing in to get the actual pitch going through the horn. That's one technique that's often used. Just regular tonguing was the second thing I did, which is sort of a maxes out at about 4/16 per quarter at like 120 to 140 different players. It depends on, and it depends on the range of the horn. It depends on a number of things, the length of the passage. But you don't want single tonguing on any wind instrument. Saxophonists are usually kind of in line with clarinetists and flutists in that way. We double tongue sometimes, but that's a skill that sort of comes and goes depending on how you're keeping up your tongue. It's not as common as it is with brass instruments. What else did I do? I remember what I did. I did the air sound with a sustain before. Air sounds are a big part of saxophone playing, as are multiphonics, which is another thing that I played, which is playing more than one pitch by using a certain combination of the fingers that sort of break the single pitch into sort of this, polyphonic, convergence. So multiphonics, there's books about multiphonics. There's a lot of different ways to write multiphonics. If you're working with a player, talk to them about the multiphonics that work for them. That's sort of the key. And using those in an ensemble setting can, again, thicken the number of pitches you can get. And it can also be a nice blend with some of the chords in the piano, the chords in the guitar. It could come in and out of multiphonics. Sometimes you can start with a single pitch and move to a multiphonic. And you can isolate certain partials of that multiphonic, move in and out of it, which can be a very beautiful horizontal gesture. Yeah, that's a good start for saxophone. Any questions about the sax right offhand? Anything you've been dying to know all these years?
Did you ever play without the mouthpiece?
Yes. Yeah. So without the mouthpiece, there becomes a sort of a percussion instrument. So I'll just try. There's some things that work especially well without the mouthpiece. One is a tongue ram. Trombo, which is basically like I'm playing like a trumpet. Let me get my trumpet lips going here. Sounds like I'm learning trumpet. Yeah. So yeah, there's that. There's all the sounds kind of come alive. So oftentimes I'll amplify pretty closely with the non-mouthpiece techniques, and you'll start to hear a whole other world. It's like this mic, like this little anthill that's just bustling of sound. So now that I don't have a mouthpiece, I can double tongue very, very quickly, almost like a flutist. Tick, 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 tick. And I can, well, at the same time, at about the same volume, play with the key clicks, which have their own world of pitch, that is related to, the combinations I'm playing there, plus you actually start to hear this venting of the air and the sound coming through different parts of the sax, and it moves around as you open and close the keys. And oftentimes I'll put like a mic in the bell, and it'll catch these sounds and just kind of blow them up like a microscope. So no mouthpiece is a really fun way to explore that whole underworld or underbelly. Any other? I'm so glad you asked about that. It's my favorite thing. Yeah, there's also a lot of sounds. I'm just going to do this. There's some sounds you can make vocally, especially without mouthpiece, but with mouthpiece too. the edge of this as an amplifier and get quite a loud kind of high frequency white noise sound, but I can play it through the horn and create different sounds of air. And gestural sort of envelopes with air and white noise. And again, if this is amplified, it can be a really, really dramatic sort of exponential curve on some of these envelopes, and that can play really, really well with some big, gestures of the other instruments. So that's another. Air sounds are a big part of all wind players doing sort of contemporary music, and it's a world we explore as well. So.
And just one more, like, how do you notate that? Is it just with words or descriptions?
Yeah, there's various ways. Air sounds often, I'll see like a square note head. It's either completely filled in or like half and half, meaning half air, half pitch. Sorry. Yeah, it'll be like a square note head, either completely filled in or half filled in with half air, half pitch. Sometimes you'll see almost like if you imagine. If you've ever notated overpressure for strings, you can do the same type of thing with air and saxophone, where it's sort of like we're gradually adding this sort of thick bar that builds into like looks like a crescendo above the staff almost, and then if it's thick and solid air, you might have this like, continuous horizontal line above the staff for that whole time. You can also just say something like, air sounds, all air. Oftentimes take it away, maybe use just one staff line to, when you're playing in that range, and have it be a little bit less, unless you really wanted on specific keyholes, and that you still use the regular staff line. But you can say that and then just have like from here till here, this is air, and then you go back to an ORD kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways, and I'd be happy to share some different ways to do it, but if you're writing a piece that's just air sounds and you want to explore a lot of different things, think of how you might just try something, get something down on the page, and then send it to saxophonists and see what they think. Yeah, good questions. I'm going to pass it over to Jay here, talk a little bit.
So I guess one thing that we talked about a little bit earlier was EBow. Probably you're all familiar with this, but just to sort of show you, a lot of times people will use this on piano as well, although it was invented for guitar and it works really well on guitar. And basically it's a electromagnet that creates a magnetic field. So it actually doesn't touch the string, but it gets it to vibrate like a violin bow or something. And it's one of the most straightforward ways to get endless sustain on a note. I'll just demonstrate it here. So a couple of things that you might have noticed there. One is that one of the limitations of it is it's hard to kind of switch strings, but once you have the string going, you can sort of slide up and down. If you don't play any guitar at all, it's something that you could probably do on a first try and make something that sounds kind of good. And it's really fun to play with. Like I said, the limitation is if you had to go quickly from one string to a different string, there's like a lag period. It's not like an instant. It's not like a bow where you can like really get the note going right away. It sort of revs up. It takes a couple seconds. So if you're writing for EBow, keep that in mind when you're writing it. A few beats to get the note going. A lot of times, like a swell into a note is great. I use the volume pedal to sort of kind of get the note going. Use the volume pedal to swell in. You can get like these really nice sort of seamless entrances, which is more or less what it sounds like naturally. But if you have the sort of the comfort of a niente swell, with the EBO material, it makes it a little easier to sort of hide the, if it takes 2 beats to sneak in, or if it takes 4 beats to sneak in, then you can kind of play with that with the volume pedal. And then the other thing that you might have noticed is you can actually control the tone of it to some degree and the volume of it by adjusting where the EBO is, and it's because the magnets interact with the pickups of the guitar. So if you're closer to the pickup, it's gonna be louder. It's gonna have like a more like a fuzzier sort of edgier sound. And as you come away from the pickup, it'll be a little softer. It'll be like a little warmer, rounder tone. So you can do that. So yeah, it's a fun thing. Speaking of pedals, I should probably just talk a little bit about the pedal board. This is like a second instrument almost, and it's one of the probably nicest things about electric guitar, that it sort of comes with all these toys that are can add lots of different layers and colors and different options for blending with other instruments. One of the simplest things, and probably the most important pedal that I have here, is the volume pedal. You can control the volume with your hand like any other instrument, but the dynamic range of the hand is pretty limited, and so the volume pedal actually is, I use it in tandem with the hand, but it's probably the more important dynamic control that I have, and it gives me access, and then I can have it at like a lower volume but really dig in, and that gives me different nuance, and it gives you special effects like Niente swells. One of the things that is really helpful about the volume pedal is how it interacts with the overdrive pedals. Overdrive, distortion, it's known by many names. Fuzz is sort of in that same category. They're all, this sort of dirty, fuzzy sound. If you have distortion, you can actually control, one thing that you can't easily do is control the amount of distortion in real time. The way that you control the amount of distortion is by turning a knob. And so while you're playing, you can't actually like lean over and turn the knob. But you can do something very similar, which is control the amount of volume that's going into the distortion. So if you kind of like picture like water flowing through a hose, distortion is when you have like a lot of force pushing the water through, and it sort of like pushes against the edges of the hose. Maybe this isn't the best analogy, but let's go with it. If you have the volume on full, the volume pedal going into the distortion, you're going to get the most amount of distortion because it's sort of like pushing all of the signal into the water into the hose. If you bring the volume pedal back, you're sort of like not putting as much water through, so it's actually not hitting the outer edges of the hose, and you'll get less of a distortion sound. It's not the same thing as a clean sound, but it's like lowering. It's one way to sort of lower and raise the amount of distortion without turning it on or off, or reaching down and turning the knob. So I'll just a little bit about that. So this is with the volume pedal all the way down. If I come back a little bit and also play lighter, it's pretty So I really like doing that, and to me, it's the closest analog to like a string player would do. So if you picture like a cellist, as they play louder, they're not actually. It's not just a volume difference, but it's a difference in the timbre, and it's a difference in the sort of the grittiness of the tone. So if you're like really digging into a string instrument, you're getting like this extra grit. So that's the way I think about distortion. Very well at that amount of distortion. As you get into like that's sort of, I guess I would call that medium. You get into like really heavy distortion. You're sort of starting at a higher point. So the ability to clean up is sort of within a range. Here it's good. I can get basically completely clean to medium distortion. If you're at the highest level of distortion, your lowest level of with the volume all the way off is going to be probably maybe where that starts. So you kind of have a window of usable amounts. But that amount of distortion is you get the effect, you get the dynamic range, and then you get the timbral range of distortions. So that's really how I distortion. So if you're thinking of like the signal path, I go from the guitar into the volume pedal into the distortion pedals. It's sort of 1, 2, 3, and you could do the volume pedal after the distortion, but that'll be much less, in my opinion. That it sounds a lot more like just changing the volume. You won't get any difference in character or timbre. From there, I go through a variety of effects, and I won't necessarily go through all of them, but a couple of ones that I think work really well in this group is one of the simplest but most effective effects is reverb. And I actually think, some instruments, including the piano with the sustain pedal down, they have this kind of built-in reverb. And so if there's music that has this sort of like, you're sort of swimming in the reverberant space, the piano holding those chords and the guitar with a sort of like a really lush reverb on, it kind of marries the sounds together, and it kind of pulls the whole ensemble. It like really it becomes like one kind of sound world. And then also percussion. The same thing with with a vibraphone with the pedal down, or like a large gong or tam tam. It sort of has a built-in reverb sound. So I'll just demonstrate a sound that I think works really well with. Obviously, that only works with kind of music. It has to be sort of slow. That can get very muddy very quickly, so it works in certain textures. But when it works, it's really nice. Another sort of big category of effects is delay. I have a couple of pedals that do a variety of delays. The simplest kind of delay would be like just a sort of like playback of the sound, and so you can be rhythmic, and you can play with that. I kind of think of how as being it's almost written out digital delay, something like that. But there's a number of special effects. One of the nicest like effect delays is reverse. It just gives you like this great, and it's the little snip at the end. It's just playing the sound backwards. So there's a number of different ways to manipulate the delay to get different effects. And then maybe just one other thing that is worth mentioning is the octave pedal. You end up using this quite a lot. You have the option of going up, down the octave, including the original sounding pitch or not. It's here to have down the octave and the sounding pitch, and it just adds this really great low end. Goes really well if you add distortion. And then alternatively, you can go up the octave. Up the octave tends to sound just like a little bit artificial. I feel like the down the octave sounds really great. I like it a lot. Just one general thing I would mention about pedals, and they're not hard to use, as you can see. You just turn them on and off. But when you're, it's kind of like playing inside the piano. When you're playing complicated music and you're trying to maintain sight lines, every time you turn something on and off, you have to look down at your foot. You're looking away from your music. You're looking away from the rest of the group. It takes longer. Like, it's nice to have plenty of time to do that. Maybe a measure of rest or something. And so sometimes a composer will get really excited about the pedals and have like, oh, turn these 3 pedals on and then play one note, and then turn them all off and do something else. And it actually becomes really, really cumbersome really quickly. So my favorite use of it is something like what I was demonstrating with the distortion. You have a setting, and you can kind of manipulate that, and depending on how the dynamic range is playing into it, and things like that can be much more musical. And then you could have, a section of, 20 measures or something where it's this sound, and then, a couple of changes, and then you have another big section, and maybe like a measure of rest to adjust it. So it's also, there's like a hidden logistics to it. So it's like, okay, just go from distortion to a delay, but without distortion. Well, that's actually like, that's not just changing one thing. It's turning one thing off, turning the other thing on. Oftentimes there's a dynamic change, so it's like you have to adjust the volume pedal. So there's actually, the hidden in, I just want this section with distortion, I just want that section clean. Okay, but that actually is multiple different operations. So anyway, as with most things, if you can kind of like put yourself into the player's mind and like think about what actually has to happen, less is more. It can get like kind of overwhelming pretty quickly. So, any questions? Okay, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Alrighty, so I'm sure most of you are aware of percussion. There's a lot of variation, a lot of instrument possibilities. With Hypercube, we use quite a bit of the percussion family. We often have different types of tom-toms, snare drums, sometimes drum set, a variety of cymbals, tie gongs, tam-tams, accessory percussion like tempo blocks and wood blocks, triangles, tambourines, Basically, like you know, the basic inventory of percussion that like a contemporary percussionist would use. Sometimes we use hand drums. I think we've had a few pieces, a couple with like djembe. And along with that are all the different like mallet options, which is, you know, kind of endless at this point. You know, there's the different types of vibraphone mallets, different types of sticks and implements you can use on all the other instruments. So for Hypercube specifically, we tend to use a lot of those different things, not always at the same time, but especially in Cube Lab when we're doing lots of different pieces that we're recording, a lot of that stuff does come up. We mentioned earlier that the vibraphone was something that we used quite a bit. We were talking about how that had like the marimba in it. The thing about the vibraphone is that it's a little bit smaller, obviously, than the marimba. And it blends really well, specifically with a lot of different instruments that are on the louder side, like the piano, the electric guitar, saxophone. I mean, in general, it blends with, I mean, depending on how you write for it, it can blend really anywhere. But I think that the option of the pedal, being able to push the pedal up or down and having the bars resonate for a specific amount of time, having like a working motor that has variable speed, and then just the durability of like metal bars where you can like scrape different things on them, like chopsticks and knitting needles. You can use other devices that vibrate on the bar. I mean, depending on the instrument and whose instrument that, like, you know, I'm playing on, or whatever percussionist is playing on. There's a lot you can do to prepare the instrument, much like the piano. So there's sort of, you know, possibilities there that you can explore and check out. Also, so, you know, one thing that comes up a lot with us specifically with this instrument and some of the other pitched instruments is the bowing aspect. If you know what crotales are, they're like a little circular metal disc that's pitched like the vibraphone and the other mallet instruments. There's also the glockenspiel, and those are like the three instruments that tend to get bowed frequently. You could also bow a marimba. It's just not as it doesn't project as much like the vibraphone would, or crotales or glockenspiel. So composers, and I think we probably found this more so with younger composers, they like to bow a lot of notes at the same time, or they have like fast bowing passages that they want to implement. And so, you know, we kind of go over that with them, and I think it's important just to kind of keep in mind that there's so much time you have to bow. If you can use one bow in each hand, I mean, right now I have a microphone in my hand, so we'll pretend this is my bow, kind of like this. You know, you can bow the naturals and the accidentals, and you can, you know, bow relatively quickly. I think when you're dealing with other instruments within your setup, so it's not, say you don't just have the vibraphone, say you have other instruments like the crotales or the glockenspiel, some tom-toms, there's a certain amount of room you have to quite quickly bow. For example, if you have your music stand right here, or if you have other instruments here and you want the accidentals bow, you kind of have to take that into account of the amount of time from going here, switching over here. Even if you're using one bow in each hand, you just sort of have to like kind of envision what the logistics would be from a physical standpoint. Time for the performer to like maybe put mallets down or drumsticks or a bass drum beater down to pick up bows. If you are doing a lot of vibraphone or just maybe mallets in general, I mean, percussionists sometimes can hold a mallet on the edge of their hand, and then they hold the bow in the other part of their hand, so they could easily do this and, you know, play from time to time. You could do that with both hands as well. So it's kind of like 4 mallet grip, except it's 2 mallets and 2 bows, or, you know, just one bow and one mallet in one hand. So that is, you know, something you can do. Instruments like the glockenspiel, if that's something you want bowed, you often have to make sure that it's not sitting in a box. They come in a box. Some of them don't come out of the box. So that's a thing that you kind of have to check on, because not all instruments are the same. You're not always able to take the glock out and bow the bar. And then with crotales, Sometimes you need two hands to bow them. You need one hand to stabilize the critality, and then the other hand does the bowing. Unless it's a really, really like nice brand new stand, the little circular disc, they spin around, so you can't like really bow it without it spinning on you. So oftentimes, you know, you need one hand to stabilize, one hand to bow, and so that's like another like logistical thing to keep in mind when you're doing something that uses a multi-percussion setup, such as like maybe a vibraphone, some drums, and other things like that. So size of the instruments, the spacing, the physical layout, similar to what Jay was talking about, you know, using your feet to operate the pedals and the buttons and having time to do that within the music. That's also pretty important for percussion, you know, time for mallet changes, time for, if it's like a really large setup and you have to move around, where like, you know, you're not gonna be able to have your foot on the vibraphone pedal the entire time because you need your foot to operate the bass drum pedal. Stuff you gotta think about. We've got like a lot of pieces where I've had to like pedal and use the bass drum pedal at the same time. It's like really hard because I need one foot to stand on. So I'm like standing on my heels, and it can get awkward, but that's like really something easy to forget about, especially if you compose, say like on your computer and it plays everything back to you and you're like just like kind of listening to what you're writing. You kind of can fall down a rabbit hole of that, composing that way, and not like maybe thinking about some of the other you know, physical aspects that are involved. There's another common thing that people really, really enjoy. This comes up quite a bit in our Cube Lab pieces. It's where you can, you strike the bar with a mallet and then you pitch bend, kind of like that. And that is a really, really nice effect on the vibraphone and very specific to the vibraphone. The range for that is usually C4 to probably like maybe like F5 depending on the instrument. Some better than others, but usually what happens is as you go up higher in pitch, the bar is smaller, and it just doesn't really operate very well for the pitch bending part. But when you're here, it's a little bit more feasible. You could probably get down a little lower too. So on this particular instrument, it's pretty nice. But not all vibraphones are like that. Some of them really only have like a specific range. It's usually like C4 to C5 that they work nicely in. This is a really nice instrument, so that's probably why it works all right. You know? I play it very gently. Yeah, we as I think for like contemporary music, and music that's similar to like what we play as percussion, you'll really find that the vibraphone of all the mallet instruments is used quite a bit more than maybe say the marimba or some of the other pitched instruments. It sort of becomes like the focal point. And another reason for that too, like I said, because it is smaller, has the pedal, has the motor, you can prepare the bars, you can scrape things on it depending on whose instrument it is and who wants to do what. You can add a lot of other instruments around it, right? You can, like I was talking about the drums, various percussion instruments, you have like a rack and you can suspend things. So it fits really nicer within the larger context of more instruments for the performer. And so I think that's one other reason why it gets used primarily a lot more. And also one reason why Hypercube uses a lot. I mean, it blends with the piano, partly because of the whole pedaling thing I think works really well. And it's just, there's just like I guess it's kind of like the less is more thing we were mentioning before. It takes up less space, but you can get a lot more options out of it. So it's pretty effective. I mean, you know, there's also, if you really want to like maybe explore writing for percussion, there's a good book by Sam Solomon called Writing for Percussion. And it goes through a lot of the 20th century repertoire, you know, starting back in the 40s, 30s, through the 60s and 70s, and 80s when there were like a lot of pieces being written for like percussion ensemble and chamber music with percussion in it. So it's a great book to check out and read. And there's also like videos on YouTube that go along with the chapters now. So you can check that out and see a lot of different things with like how you would dampen a snare drum, how you would dampen a tom-tom, maybe different ways of bowing a cymbal, different types of cymbals. And then the other thing with percussion is it's always expanding in terms of like what you can get for equipment. There's a lot more like cymbal options and like little gadgetry options now than there were even like 20 years ago. There's like constantly like new products like coming out that you could like check out. So I always, you know, encourage composers to check things out and then maybe buy those instruments and like send them to me to play on. You know? You know? So we actually have. Did we mention Eric Wobbles? We did. Which piece? So we have this other piece by Eric Wobbles, and that piece is completely based on the pitch set of a China cymbal that the composer Eric Wobbles got. Like he just purchased one from like Steve Weiss, which is this major percussion company that just sells all forms of percussion brands and equipment. And he picked out the pitches that he liked on the cymbal, and he marked them with like a little sticky note. And then those pitches became the pitches that the piece is sort of evolves around. So I don't think I've ever played a piece where the composer like picked the pitches out of a cymbal, a China cymbal to be specific, and then he wrote the piece based around those. I think it was like, what, 4 or 5 pitches? So it was cool because then I got a free China cymbal. And then I had to get another one because I could only use that China cymbal for that piece. So it's an excuse to get a couple more for other stuff. You know, he also, for that piece too, purchased, he didn't purchase, but he spotted these basically brand new, what are called anvils. And anvils are basic percussion instruments that people have been using in orchestra for a really, really long time. But it wasn't just until too long ago that they started manufacturing the specific pitches. And then the pitches, each anvil has like 4 pitches, one on each end, and then one where the node would be. So it's pretty cool. So he wrote, for those 2 anvils, different sets of pitches, and then the China cymbal. So I always think like a good example of maybe somebody like branching out, reaching out, looking to see what's out there from like a product standpoint, exploring and thinking about it a little bit, and then writing a really cool piece that features it and works with it. So yeah, that's percussion in a nutshell. Any questions? Well, we have some beer in the back. For those online, you can drink with us. You know. So, who hand it back to maybe Aaron? Here, thanks.
So I think that's about it for tonight. So I hope this was useful to you composers that are considering writing for. Thank you. And I hope you'll consider writing for our individual instruments and possibly for Hypercube sometime. Thank you for having us to the New York Women Composers.
Can you say more about the workshop in the fall?
Yeah, so our workshop in the fall is the Hypercube Composition Lab, and this fall is going to be our 6th time running it. We usually announce it in August, and we send out emails. We do social media blasts to announce that it's happening. And we invite composers from basically all walks of life. We've had very established composers, and we've had composers that are in high school that just want to learn more about writing for instruments and about writing for a chamber ensemble. And each time we offer the lab, we do different workshops. For example, last time we had a guest composer, Mara Gibson, in to talk about her music and talk about her processes. And before that, we had a group that does, they're called BKT Education. And how would you describe what they do? They talk a lot about career development, things like that, and how to promote yourself as a composer. So that was useful to many different composers. And we often offer workshops on like what works. We sometimes share scores and say this is something that works really well, and then just we all have conversations about what each composer has in their mind, and it always ends up being a nice group, and we end up sharing a lot. So yeah, the process starts in August, and we do the whole thing online. We started it during the pandemic, and we found it works really well online. We just invite composers to participate over Zoom, and we send recordings back and forth, so it doesn't have to be just over Zoom because the audio is not always great. But we collaborate with them in the fall, and we do it on weekends, usually starting at the end of September to the end of October, sometime in that timeline. We're still working out the details for this fall, but we'll let you know as soon as possible.
We also have all the videos of the Cube Labs on our YouTube page.
Yeah.
All the stream concerts that we did. They're still up on our YouTube page, so you can go check it out and
Yeah, check them out. So they're on our Hypercube YouTube page, Hypercube Ensemble, and yeah, we have all of the concerts that we've done. They're all up there, so you could check out all the different pieces that have been composed during CubeLab, and it's a really wide range of different kinds of pieces and different styles. Yeah, it's a really fun thing for us. Actually, we really love it.